Hello and welcome to Facebook Live at 5. Just to introduce myself, my name is David Rowley and I'm the Training and Technical Manager for BAL. Also, behind the scenes you'll see Phil asking questions during the course of the next half an hour, 45 minutes. And Phil is the PR, contacts manager. So, what is today all about? Today is all about preparation. We all talk about preparation a lot. But in particular, we want to talk about board systems. Now, you all know about boards, but what I want to bring to you today is where you can use them, some of the elements of BAL Board, in particular, what you can do over others, and also just reinforce some of the other elements with regards to standards and so on. Now, boards themselves have been around for a number of years. Generally, these are lightweight boards, foam core type of boards, which are ideal because they're lightweight, they're easy to cut, and then you've also got fibre cement boards, which obviously give more on weight, but also give some structure to the actual surface that you're going to be tiling onto as well. What BAL Board is actually a combination of the two. So it's a hybrid between the two. These are what we refer to as our magnesium oxide boards. Okay, so that's what we're going to be going through over the course of the next 30 minutes. Before we actually get started, and I've obviously introduced myself, is those who are actually on now, if you like to shout out with a hi, and what we'll do then is anybody that puts hi during the next 30 minutes while we're live or so, then you will actually receive a goodie bag. And when we'll get your details and so on. Plus, there's actually something else going on, and that is if you actually send us questions during the course of the next 30 minutes or so, we will actually answer them as best we can, obviously, depending on how many there is. We may not answer them all, so we obviously will respond through the Facebook page as well. But any questions that you put forward, doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's related to the subject, you will actually be entered into a prize draw, which you can actually receive a goodie job lot of BAL products ranging from BAL Board, obviously, because that's the subject today, both 12 and 6. You'll also get ability of actually winning, if you are the lucky person, things like Flex 1, tile adhesive, also Micromax 2 grout, and also BAL Tankets. So please feel free, ask your questions, and obviously we'll answer them as we go through the next session. So, with regards to BAL Board, why do we bring it out? Like we did at the last session when we talked about uncoupling systems, it's all about this BAL system, providing you security and to your customers, provide a full BAL system. But how did we come about using BAL Board? Like we've done with all our products, we don't just bring products to the market on a win situation. We actually delve in, we actually talk to you as far as what you need. It's all about making life easy for you, helping you to minimize, reduce, or stop, in particular, shortcutting, which I know happens on site from time to time. BAL Board was actually through our what we refer to as our fix and focus sessions. And this is something that we do with all new products and innovations that we bring to market. And you actually get the opportunity to ask your views and so on. What we did, and how you actually apply for that, by the way, is if you're already part of the U Plus BAL scheme, then you, when the opportunity arises, then we will obviously contact you and say, would you like to take part in this innovation? If you haven't joined U Plus BAL, then if you go onto the BAL website, and register your details, we will not obviously pass details on to third party. It's all very much secure, and this way we can obviously send emails out when required regarding changing standards, new product innovations, anything that's going to affect you, as well as obviously product innovations. When we actually launched BAL Board, what we did, the background, is we had 5 boards that we actually gave to a number of fixers. And they actually physically trialed and tested each of those boards, finding out what's good about them, what's bad. And this obviously came to the point of when we launched BAL Board is a hybrid board, giving you all the benefits from a lightweight system, ease of cutting, and also the ability to be a board that can give you more structure, sound, providing increased weight as far as on the surface. So we talk about wall application. This board itself can actually carry up to 100 kilograms in weight over a square metre area. I'll talk a bit more about that over the course. So as far as the BAL board itself, what BAL board is, it comes in 6mm and 12mm. 6mm, like so. Obviously, the board's a board, but what's quite unique about it is we've actually made the size 1200 by 600. And you might be asking yourself, why is that? Because within the British standards of BS 5385, it's obviously with any board systems, this doesn't apply just to tile-backer boards now, this applies to any boards, including plasterboards. You should be fixing at centres of 300 millimetres. That's maximum or closer together. So this obviously fits in with that 300 centres across the whole of the board. What's also unique is the fact that we also do a 12mm. The 12mm weighs 9 kilograms. The 6mm weighs 4.5. So they're actually the same board material, just two different thicknesses. And 9 kilograms is very lightweight, giving you the ability and also the size enable you to pick up, move into position, and the ability to be able to screw and work on your own. One of the problematic with boards is sometimes they're overly sized and heavy, and the difficulty is trying to screw them in at the same time as hold it in place as well. The board itself has actually also got other unique factors, because the fact that with boards you're not always going to be fully tiling rooms, though we hope with full tile rooms, you may end up doing sections where they're going to be painting above. What's quite unique with BAL board is also, as an added extra, is on the reverse side, you have a decorating side. This means that you can actually work your setting out in accordance to where the tiles are going to finish and revert the boards around the opposite side, and then that can actually be painted or even wallpapered. The 6mm board is only suitable for floor application. It's not recommended for wall application because it's quite, with it being thin, it can obviously bend. And obviously that can have a knock-on effect on the tiles that you're going to be fixing on top. The 12mm board, on the other hand, can be used for the wall, but also can actually provide more structure as an overlay over timber floors as well. So it's actually dual purpose. When you come to obviously screwing, I'll explain a bit more about that. So what I'd like to do now is actually move into and show you a little bit on the cutting aspect, because what's all important about this is the ease. We don't want to start using other types of tools. We already carry enough tools in the van as it is. So what you need to do is, what you've got here is literally is a craft knife. And the craft knife is all you need to actually physically cut the boards. You don't need to use any power tools, though they can be used if you want to make it obviously even quicker for certain types of shapes. But ultimately, if you want to actually cut a board in half, you can literally just use a craft knife. And simply, all you do, obviously measure out the distance that you need, using a straight edge, using a craft knife, score down. You only need to do it once, and you can literally snap it like so. Literally cuts like plasterboard, but with all the benefits of the increase in weight when you're fixing tiles, and literally just score the back, and as simple as that. And because it's so easy to cut, what also this brings to the table is the ability to be able to shape around things like going around toilets, going around any sorts of shapes on the actual floor. Now this is something obviously a little bit, something you probably won't do, but if you actually physically snap the board you can literally cut the back side of the board with your knife, which I know you can't see that here, and literally cut whatever shapes you wish. So don't be afraid if you've got some complex cutting or boarding out to be done. It can be easily done by using a knife. And again, if you want to use power tools, it's always suitable. I've even used a saw myself in certain cases. But it doesn't stop there. And don't forget, we're using 12mm boarding, which is typically what you're going to be using for wall application. What you can also do is, if I move this over to the edge, is if you've got holes that you need to actually take out of the board, obviously you can use a drill, but if you use a hammer itself and literally tap through, you can actually place holes through to go over pipes, anything you actually need. But what's quite unique about it, and this is actually from the point of view, is you've got ease of cutting with lightweight foam core boards, but this gives you more structure, so you can put accessories on, like toilet roll holders, or if you've got to put curtain poles up, or any type of things on the surface, you can literally just screw and fix straight into the board itself. And if you get to the point where you need to take just small amounts off, say for instance you've marked it too big, which we sometimes do, just using your pair of towel nippers, you can literally just nip the board itself and take a small amount off. Very simple, very easy. And if you notice also, obviously when you're scoring and cutting, there's very little dust. Obviously when you're knocking holes through, or if you're chipping away with your towel nippers to take it off, there's obviously going to be a bit more core material. But the material itself is not hazardous. So therefore you can actually cut these boards, install the boards, everything will be done internally. You don't need to wear a mask. You literally just work where you're obviously located and physically install as you're going along, as opposed to going outside and getting kitted up with PPE and so on. So that's the BAL board. So if you look at it itself, on one side it's got the printed area, and it does actually clearly state tile on this side. I don't think we can get any clearer than that. So this is the actual tile inside the board, which has got a rough texture. And on the other side, you have your decorated side if you wish to paint or wallpaper. Now, not that this would not be the case. If, for instance, you want to, or if the customer wishes to plaster or over the surface of the board, that can actually be done. But you would have to, we'll talk about priming in a moment, but you would always apply a plaster material on the actual tile side of the board.
That brings us on to a question from Sean Kelly on Facebook, who's asking,
hello, Sean.
Can you tile on the reverse side if you accidentally glue it down the wrong way?
The point of view of the reason why you've got the actual rough side is to actually enable obviously getting a correct key there. It would be better if that's the case to unscrew and actually fix the boards the correct way. But it is a good point. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's quite a few. We've got Lewis on from our ASM in the north as well. He's asked some good questions. So we're going to go into the installation in a minute, but we've been asked about, does it need priming? Obviously, going to be going into that in a minute.
Yeah, well, with regards to priming, you've got to consider, as far as there's boards on the market that say don't prime. Obviously, the reason for us, we always recommend priming our boards as well as many others. And the reason for that is with cement boards in particular, and as we talk about cement boards, or in this case, BAL board, is quite porous. And I will be brutally honest with you, when I was fixing myself, I was always this impression that if something that's porous, by placing an adhesive on there, will give it better key. And you can see the logic behind that. But what you've got to consider here is, where we're using cement-based materials, if you're using a cement-based powder material, The whole purpose of the adhesive is not for the water to escape too quickly. And I think I mentioned this at the last event as well. So the cement-based tile adhesive needs the water to keep within the material for it to hydrate, for it to set. If that water is escaped into the board shortly after it's been applied, there won't be sufficient water to hydrate the cement. So therefore, the bond strength can be actually slightly less. So you get a weaker sort of bond. So we do recommend priming with BAL board, and what we recommend is something like BAL Prime APD. Okay, again, keep it with the BAL systems. BAL Prime APD is actually a fast-drying acrylic primer, and obviously you will be aware because it's been mentioned on many different feeds on Facebook and social media, but please don't use a PVA, and we don't do one. Acrylic primer, this is, it's a fast drying, and all it is it's also coloured. And what we recommend is that you put 1 part BAL Prime APD to 1 part clean cold water. So you don't use it neat. So you actually get coverage going a lot further. This obviously just helps to take some of that porosity out of the board, and then the ability to tile on top. Now, some of you might be asking the questions, why can't we just have a board that's already pre-primed? And it's a good question. But what you've got to also consider is cement-based adhesives are only one side of materials for sticking tiles. We also have ready mixed. And also you're going to be putting things like, you might be putting tanking systems, which with regards to tanking systems, with BAL board, we would always recommend that you waterproof the BAL board. Even though it's water resistant, it's not waterproof. So it means it can live in water, it won't be affected. The important bit is why we recommend tanking, is so that the water itself doesn't absorb through into the material behind, which could be timber stud work, and that can obviously be affected by water. But with the primer itself, is you only need to prime cement-based adhesives when they've been used. If you're using ready mixed, we actually encourage you not to prime, because with ready mixed, because the nature of the product is the fact that they have to disperse and take the moisture out very quickly, we want to encourage that water to go. That's why we recommend that with ready mixed products onto a cement board, such as BAL board, or not, such as a magnesium oxide board, such as BAL board, we would recommend that you just use the ready mix adhesive directly on, okay, on the tiling side.
I've got another question from Diane. He says, does BAL board have less soundproofing than plasterboard? Our customers have worried regarding the thickness of BAL board compared to plasterboard for noise reasons.
I actually don't know the answer to that one, which it does happen at times. I mean, from a point of view of board itself, it's obviously got better thermal properties than plasterboard. From a sound perspective, I'm not sure. It's something we could obviously check on and obviously feedback to you afterwards. But thank you very much, Dan, for that question. But yeah, it's something we will look into.
Yeah, so we'll get back to Diane on that question. David has asked, is it easier to cut than hardy backer boards?
Well, from the point of view is you haven't got to use specialised tools. You only have got to use a Stanley knife or a craft knife. And as I've obviously demonstrated, just by using one score, that's all it needs, you can literally snap the board itself. And I actually did this earlier, and it's something it just shows the capability of BAL board from the point of view of what you could actually do with it. There's no job that you cannot fix around, cut around, install around. And I did this very earlier, and this is actually a full sheet of BAL board that I've actually cut through. Because it's got 2 layers of reinforcement, the board itself, you can actually create curves. So you straight away you can look at the artistic side, or simply if you've got some columns that you need to create a round column around, or if you've got some like bath panels or any seats or anything that you need to physically be tiling, because you're seeing now with a lot of fashion programs they're actually using tiles in more than just straightforward ways. They're implementing new ideas and different ways of how we can actually install tiles. And this, obviously, the capability of BAL Board. And yes, you can buy boards that have got these pre-slits in. The beauty is with BAL Board is you've just got one board that you buy, and when you turn up on the job, if you need to create a curve, you can do it. If you need to cut round an obstruction, you can do it very simply. It's all about, because you never know what you're going to face on the job at that particular time. But BAL Board gives you that ability to be able to do the job. Very simple and very easy. So that's just a little something that you can actually do with BAL Board itself. So, we're talking about priming a moment ago. So, all you need to do is simply taking a cup, a jug, whatever you want to do, depending on obviously the amount, literally it's simple, clean cold water, pour 1 clean water into a bucket. Now, I've already done this before, but again, just to show you, with the prime itself, it's always better to physically shake the actual bottle, just to obviously just check it hasn't settled in your van, or obviously when you purchase it from the store, and literally pour the primer into the water. You just stir, make sure that's connected, and then literally that is all you need to do. And that can be rolled on, it can be brushed on, and literally you only need to apply 1 coat. So it's not about physically sealing the actual board up. You want to encourage some absorption in, but it's about actually just reducing that porosity. So I've got here a roller, pour some actually in the tray. Now, what's one of the things I've never really mentioned before, and it's probably a good point, and probably most of you do this anyway, but any primer that's actually left over at the end of the job, it's not wasted, it doesn't go off. You can actually bottle that back up, and as long as you make sure you put the dilution rate on there, it can be then used on the next job as well. So I just pre-wet the roller, like so. And I'll just get over behind now, if you see. I've actually placed some boards actually on here, and we'll talk about the fixing in a second. But just so this gives it a chance to dry, you literally apply the primer onto the actual board itself. Because it's coloured as well, you can see where you're applying it. And that's all you literally do. Now remember, this only applies if you're using cement-based adhesives. If it's ready mixed, then I would encourage you not to prime it. So you can see the difference.
Dave, do you need, well, we're going to come on to it in a minute, but when you're installing the boards, what type of screws do you need?
Right, with regards to the screws itself, I was going with regards, I've pre-done this because we're going to show as far as putting tapes on and so on. But with regards to screws, you need to just use just normal galvanized screws. You literally, for wall application, I would suggest that you go for something like 42 millimeters in length. That will actually give you enough depth there to actually give you that 100 kilograms per square meters. Okay, and obviously you don't need to pre-drill. You literally drill into the board. It will eat into the board itself, and it will go straight through and into the core of the board itself. So it's not the screws aren't protruded. So that's one other good thing is you haven't got to pre-drill. You can literally mark it up. And the good thing about it, because it's white in colour, it also helps with regards to putting lines down to put your screws in, but also more important from your setting out perspective as well. And that can actually be, you can screw obviously into sort of framework, so talking about timber lengths on the wall, so stud work. Obviously, if it is that the centres are greater than 300, it would be best practice to put them at 300 centre or close them up accordingly.
If you're talking about walls then, Richie Jones has asked, what would you do if your walls are out? If there are solid walls, can you dab them?
You can dab them, but we would always use some of that concrete screws just to go in at the dab points as well. So yes, you can actually do that. Obviously, if you're using timber, you could obviously put packings behind to actually create your levels of flatness in that way. And
Tony's asked, do you have to use washers, penny washers?
No. And that's the good thing about it, because it's not a foam core type of board. If you normally screw into them on its own, it will just go straight through the board. This obviously provides rigidity and structure there, so you can just use normal galvanised screws, again, which you can buy from your local house, from your local stores and that type of thing. So you haven't got to use specialised screws, as well as I mentioned earlier, specialised tools. The other thing we talk about, so as far as fixing, screw fixing allows the ability to be able to start the tiling process basically once you've actually primed and scrim taped the actual joints. If you're using the dab method and screw fixing, then we would suggest that you let that dry first before you obviously apply any additional more weight onto the surface. Okay. As obviously I mentioned about the fact that we talked about the obviously size of the boards being the 12 or 6, but one of the things I didn't actually mention, and it's probably something quite important really for you all, is that because now we've got a 1200 by 600, it makes life easier to be able to put into any type of vehicle. As well as obviously the ability that you can lift them, it's simple, very easy, carry more than one at a time, and just from a manual handling process itself. So from the point of view is, you can put it in your vans, you haven't got to clear all the van out to be able to get the boards in a lot of cases. Okay, so that's the nature of the screw fixing. I say you just literally just screw straight in, no pre-drilling, no specialised screws, just galvanised screws. Again, I would encourage you going for a longer screw length, and that would be normally about 42 millimetres in length. And the head, you should be looking at about 4 or 4.2 or something like that.
Me is asked, just can you use, or just using general plasterboard adhesives for dab, or would you use, if you're dabbing BAL Board onto a solid wall, you would use BAL adhesive?
I would, what I would do is I would use a cement-based adhesive for that type of application, because of the nature of. Because if you're going to be fixing boards with a cement-based adhesive, it's a good point, and we'll be talking about floors and showing about timber floors in particular. But with regards to, if you want to install this onto a blockwork or render or something like that you need to build out as accordingly, then you can actually physically apply adhesive to the wall and bed the boards on, but we also would recommend that you prime the backside. So if ever you're going, the simple way of doing it is, if ever you're going to use an adhesive to fix the boards down, and this also would be the same if you're doing a cement screed, if you want to overboard, and you're not using any screws at all, then we would actually recommend you dilute the primer 1:1 again on the backside and insert the actual board onto the screed. Now, we've talked about, just jumping back in a second, just one of the things I want you to be aware of, and most of you probably know this anyway, but for those who aren't aware, and there's a lot of people who still use it, and that is in the British standards, so BS 535 that I mentioned earlier, part 1, which is actually in relation to internal wall tiling. that was actually changed back in 2018. And the reason why those changes came about, one of the major changes to Part 1, is that now, through the Tile Association and through the British standards, it's now that plywood is not suitable for tiling, full stop, on walls itself. Okay, so any timber boxing in, or any bath panels, or behind the toilets or vacuums, anything like that, where you've actually been boarded up with a plywood, we cannot recommend, and it should not be recommended, that any tiling should be fixed directly to plywood or timber in general. Okay, and the reason for that, it's not that all of a sudden the tiles don't work. It's because of the quality of plywood or timber that's now being used and sold in the UK is not as good as it was 20, 30 years ago. Now, you can still get it, but it's a lot more expensive. So people are using alternative timber sheeting, and that has had a knock-on effect where tile installations have failed. So to actually best practice and safeguard you when you're fixing tiles is now that if it's a plywood or timber surface on a wall, that should be either removed or overboarded with BAL board, for example. Okay, and screw fixed into. So you overboard that itself with a 12 mil. Okay. On floors, timber is still suitable, but again, there may be changes that in the future. We don't know where that will go yet, but there could be changes with that. But at the moment, as it stands, timber floors you can still install, but in a lot of cases, timber itself is normally overboarded because it's not dimension stable in a lot of cases. It doesn't provide the strength for the tiles because it could bend or bow. But also, board systems are a better surface to tile onto. So if we move over to the timber floor here, what we've got here is I've done a little mock-up area of a tongue groove floor itself. I've also pre-primed it first, okay? And all you do is, now, this is where we've got the option. You've got the 6 mil board, which I've got here in front of me. This can actually be used directly on the board, and obviously it can be screw fixed once you put a layer of tile adhesive underneath, which I will show you in a second. Because it's the 6 mils, obviously will provide a better tile surface to fix to, but what it doesn't do is add any rigidity to the surface itself. So we've got to ensure that the floor itself is dimension stable, and by using a 6 mil board, what we would recommend is the use of what we would recommend if we were going down into the timber floor itself. And as you probably, if you were involved or you saw the last Facebook Live when we talked about uncoupling mats, we would then recommend, once the board has been installed correctly, we would use an uncoupling mat. Or alternatively, we have a elastomeric adhesive, better known as single part fast flex, which is a rubber-based material, very deformable, and an anti-fracture membrane that you can actually go directly on as the adhesive itself. But that is if you're using the 6 mil board. Okay.
Can you use a 12 mil board on the floor to provide a structural overlay?
Yes, you can. If you wanted to, if you want to actually change that to a 12 mil, this will actually provide more structure to the actual floor itself, and this enables you to change the selection of adhesives to using something like Rapid Flex 1 or Flex 1 or even Pourable 1, and install the tiles in the normal way as you would do if you get onto a sand cement screed.
Because I've had a couple of questions from Fraser said about using, obviously you can use 6 mil on the boards, but is it 10 mil British standard for floors?
The British standard for any overlay, and it's the one that's recognised is a plywood overlay, should be a minimum of 15. Now, that is obviously will provide as an overlay strengthening. A 12 mil BAL board will actually provide you a structurally overlay. You couldn't actually fix the 12 mil direct onto the joists. It has to be fixed onto a timber floor, so it being chipboard or if it's being tongue and groove in this particular case. All we're doing here is, you think about it, if you want to tile onto a timber floor, it's not always dimensionally stable. You've always got potentially some bounce, possibly in places. That would obviously, depend on how much deflection, you may have to look at that and strengthen the floor first before you put the BAL board on. But what you've got here is, if you've got, for example, a chipboard, and now that's becoming more popular than tongue and groove these days, if you fix it onto chipboard, and a particular chipboard with a green waxy coating, which some of you may have come across, you can't really tile onto that waxy coating. It doesn't matter how much you abrade the surface, it's very difficult. So it's much easier then to go over with a BAL board. And if it's already structurally sound, a 6mm would be an opportunity. Then you're not raising the height too much, and you can obviously, using uncoupling systems like BAL wrapping mat or single part fast flex, and complete the project with no issues whatsoever. But if you want to provide a bit more strength to the floor, then you change from the 6 to the 12 and install. Now, where I'm going to show you in a second is I'm going to show you using an adhesive to bed the boards down, and then you screw fix. Because we're using the screws in the board itself, we won't need to prime the underside, because the adhesive itself is only providing a bed underneath to take any undulations out of the floor itself. But what you can do is, if you change the 6mm to a 12, if the floor is already dimensionally stable and it's already flat, but you need to just give it some additional structure, you can actually screw straight to this without actually putting adhesive underneath. But if there's any undulations, then it's always better to put a bed of adhesive, and using a 6mm notch as a minimum of adhesive on the underside to take any undulations out of the floor. But if it's perfectly flat and you want to just provide a little bit more structure to the floor, you can actually screw fix the 12mm directly into the floor itself. So those are your options there.
What about sealing the joints on the I know you have touched on it, about scrim tape and sealing the joints.
Yeah, what you should do is, once the boards have been installed, then what you would do is you prime the boards, which we did on the wall a moment ago, and then once that's dry, you replace the scrim tape on any board joints. The only change is if you've got a situation where you're doing half tiled and then half on the decorated side, which is the smoother side of the board, then you wouldn't have to use the scrim tape on the side where it's going to be painted. You just use a proprietary decorated filler and smooth it down and sand it over it and paint it, or wallpaper, and fill any obviously screw holes in the board itself. So, now with regards to tile adhesives, if you're going to be using, it's always best and preferred that you use something like Rapid Flex 1, which is our rapid setting adhesive. This actually has an hour pot life, so you can mix a full bag, and literally just needs about 5 litres of water, clean cold water, mixed up with a paddle mixer, and literally comb this out. It's better to use the Rapid Flex 1, or you could use Portable 1, than using any standard setting adhesives. But literally, once you prime the floor itself, apply the adhesive to the actual floor, and depending on how much, if there's actually any undulations in the floor itself, you would be looking at using something like a 6mm notch trowel, but you could always move that to an 8, and in some cases you might increase that to 10. But literally just comb the actual material out onto the floor itself, like so. place the board in position. Move around. If it is obviously you can't do, you can always put some of your weight on, just to make sure it's fully engaged into the disc itself. And because now we're screw fixing this down, you won't need to prime the underside of the board. But then literally all you do is take your screws, and literally fix it into the actual board itself. Now I'm using small ones here only because I've got not much depth, because it's just a mock-up, but make sure you use the sufficient screw to make sure it anchors into the board itself. You can see there how it eats into the board. So there's no pre-drilling. You literally just take the screw and off you go.
A reminder of what screws you need again, Dave?
So the screws that you need, you should be looking at galvanised screws, and literally just make sure that it's not rounded heads. Make sure that obviously it can go straight through. You could use any sort of galvanised screws, drywall screws, anything like that.
Right, Sean Kelly, we talked about scrim tape on the floors. Scrim or fibre tape is asked, I'm not sure.
We would encourage the use of, again, in line with obviously tests, and obviously that we actually have a scrim tape on the BAL range already. So again, because we use scrim tape with another product within the range, which is BAL Tankit, that obviously is on the range. It's something you have already. Therefore, we use that on the actual BAL board as well.
Luke Finchon's asked, didn't think building control liked to tiling onto wood anymore.
Yeah. They don't, well, with regards to timber on walls, that has actually come from the tiling industry, from the TTA and the British standards, because they actually helped to write the standards as well. So the TTA were involved in that, and it's about, as I say, protection. But again, if you've got situations, and chipboard floors are still being used in new builds. So that's where you would use either coupling mats, if it's actually suitable, but in a lot of cases, more and more people now are doing away with plywood overlays. So a 12mm cement board would be the best option. Okay, so with regards to board itself, when we talk about floors, again, just to recap, if it's a 6mm board that you use, we would treat that as if you're tiling onto the existing timber floor. So what we're doing is you just give you the better surface to tile onto. So with regards to specification recommendations, we would always recommend, like if you're going to any timber floor, is that you use a uncoupling system, such as BAL Rapid Mat, or Flexbone 2 Easy, or Flexbone Varied. And obviously, if you're unsure of those products, you can look back on our YouTube channel, and we've got a full live event that we did a couple of months ago showing the installation of that. Or alternatively, you can use one of our historic elastomeric adhesives, which a lot of you will be familiar with. It's Fast Flex. We now have a single part Fast Flex.
Just thinking, Dave, Fast Flex, you can use that on the walls. So thinking about the sound deadening question. We had the question from Diane earlier on about the sound proofing on the walls. Maybe that's not.
So the single part Fast Flex will actually provide some reduction in sound. Typically, you're looking at around about 3 decibels, but so it will help with that. But as I say, to meet the full sound regulations, then single part Fast Flex on its own would not be sufficient. That's why you have sound deadening mats and systems that are available to give a full system. And obviously, if that's something that you are looking at, that may be something that you can actually contact us on, and we give you more information. We sort of touched on waterproofing. Yeah. BAL board. You have to be in a wet room. Yeah. With BAL board itself, it is a water resistant. Now, with a lot of board systems, Not all, some boards on the market are actually waterproof. But when we talk about BAL Board, we want to give you a robust system that can be used in not just shower areas, but it's all about now encouraging the use of BAL Board everywhere. And this is something that, if you think about it, is actually more attractive to you. If you prepare it and put your board yourself, you know it's going to be done right. Therefore, you can make more money, and also you're saving time because you can install the tiles a lot quicker, a lot easier, because you've ensured it's actually right for tiling. Give it somebody else, you have to then work over that and end up it's costing the customer a lot more in time as well. So something to consider. But now you've got the ability of an easy system that you can literally just cut using basic hand tools. Power tools are still available if you want to, but you can use basic hand tools. You've got the ability that they can fix things on without the issues of them popping out. With foam core boards, they're not particularly good if you want to put fixture and fittings on. This, obviously, you can quite easily with all that lightweight ability to hang, hold, and so on. Also, when you talk about the screws and fixing, it's also a good idea to make sure that the boards themselves are not fixed direct to the floor. You should be looking at a minimum of 6 mil, which obviously is providing a 6 mil board is going to be on the floor as well. So you actually provide some expansion between the two surfaces. If you use a 12, then you need to be a minimum of 12 mil from the floor. Same in the internal corners. And also, between each of the boards, it's always better to actually leave a mil to 2 mil gap between the boards to help with expansion and so on as well. Now, the prime itself is dry. I've not touched it, but I know it's dry. So what we have here is, this is actually within the range already. So it's something that you can get access to already when using things like BAL Tankit as a waterproofer. So when you scrim taping the joints, you've already put that in place to put the BAL Tankit over the top. But you should always scrim tape all board joints if you're going to be tiling. And literally all you do is, it's self-adhesive, and literally all you do is place the tape onto it. It sticks them to the board. This should always be done after the priming, not before, and then just using a pair of scissors or your knife, and literally just go down each of the joints. And then what you do is use your adhesive. So again, things like Rapid Flex 1. Just literally stick open. And that then is ready to actually physically fix directly on. Do your setting out? You can do your setting out beforehand before you put the scrim tape if you wish. But literally the ability now is you can start fixing directly onto that with your cement-based adhesive, with any sort of tiles from stone, porcelain, ceramics. You're providing a structured surface, which is obviously can now be used. It also, the board itself will point out to you, in case, because we've all seen a lot more external tiling being used. The BAL board is only suitable for internal use, for walls and floors in both domestic, commercial, but this now provides you a strong, durable material, enabling you to physically fix tiles, ease of cutting, ease of marking, and ease of fixing. Is there any other questions, Phil, before?
No, I don't think so. But obviously, if anybody does ask any questions, we can always come back to it later.
Okay then. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And if any other questions do come in, then obviously we will answer them on the feed itself. Also, just so you're aware, is you get the opportunity, obviously, through Facebook Live at the moment, but this will also be broadcasted onto our YouTube channel, on the BAL YouTube channel. So for future reference, if you need to obviously refer back to any parts, then feel free to obviously visit and watch it again. And obviously, we're all here to help and support you. If so, we're on the end of a phone call. If we can help and support you going forward, any projects or anything you're unsure about, it's better to ask before obviously going ahead.
Just one quick question, last question from Sean Kelly. So on the wall, you would use a 2mm spacer to create an expansion gap.
So yeah, you could use a tile space if necessary, just to create a gap between each of the boards. That's the easiest way of doing it. Okay then everyone, thank you for listening, and I'll look forward to speaking to you, and I'll see you at the next Facebook Live. Thank you.